Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Tobias Mayer on, and we're going to go through the use of language in IT, mob programming, and metaphor, and possibly artful making in new product development. So, first, though, Tobias, can you give a little bit of an introduction, and then we can kick off our first topic?
Yeah. So I came across extreme programming in 1997 for the first time, and I was studying software development at university at the time, and I was doing a project on software process, and digging into it in all kinds of ways. It was all very new to me. But when I came across this paper on extreme programming, it was actually interesting because it wasn't a paper written by the extreme programming guys. It was a paper written about how bad extreme programming was by someone in the opposition. And I read this paper and I thought, this XP sounds great, so it served the wrong purpose for him, but it served the right purpose for me. And so I kind of started reading more about it and learning about it, and never ever really got the chance to do it wholeheartedly. I've never, it was still very rare back then in the early 2000s. And when I moved to Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, there was the companies I worked for were not adopting that as much as I tried to push it. And I would do bits and pieces of it. I got into certainly doing into test-driven work and continuous integration, pairing as much as I could with people. But I was up against it really. So, but eventually I discovered Scrum as a result of learning about XP. And I'd connected with some of the forums, Agile Testing. I think it was a forum called Agile Testing that Lisa Crispin used to run back in those days, and it had some great posts on it. And then people started talking about Scrum on there, and so which I'd never heard of. But I had just been promoted to being a manager, which I didn't really want to do. I liked writing code. I didn't want to manage other people writing code. But there you go. I just kind of accepted it. I accepted it thinking I was going to get a pay raise, but I was wrong.
Oh, no.
I lost out in both ways. But I found that the problem was I knew that a lot of the people I was supposed to be managing and who had reported to me were better programmers than I was. So I thought, well, I can't assign work to these people, so I need a different way of approaching this. And so Scrum gave me that, allowing the team to self-organize model. So as a manager, I was more like a Scrum Master, really. And then I just kind of like went into that field and really started enjoying it and teaching Scrum as a consultant, working with lots of different organizations. There was quite a hunger for it back in the early 2000s, and for both extreme programming and Scrum. It seemed there was Scrum especially, but I was always pushing for better programming practices because there was really so many bad ones around. But I wouldn't teach it myself because I really didn't have the skills for that. So I would find coaches. I would find XP coaches that I knew, as I was part of the community in the Silicon Valley XP group there. And so I always had people to draw on and to supplement my own work. So it was an exciting time, it really was. And then, as we know, Scrum kind of took over, didn't it? And which was fantastic financially, I have to admit, for me to be teaching for those years, and for many people as well.
Yeah.
Finally, it's kind of like, it seems like it's dying a bit, well, quite a lot actually. It's kind of dying, which is probably a good thing. Actually, it's probably had its time, and it needs to morph into something else. It needs to evolve, like
Right.
all things. And I'm not sure what that evolving is at the moment, but I want to be part of it. I think that there's some, the manifesto for agile software development is still a beautiful document, and those 12 principles, I love them, and I want to live by those principles in any work environment that I'm in, and I want other people to be able to embrace those as well. So I think it still stands as a rock, the manifesto, for all the work that we do. I mean, it's coming back to that as a basic thing.
It's possible that many people found a way to do Scrum and not follow the Agile Manifesto, right?
Yeah, so
That's
much.
part of the problem.
I mean, a lot of people I've worked with, they've never even heard of it. They say we
Yeah.
want to be agile. And I say, oh, what part of the Agile Manifesto is attractive to you? And they go, the what?
Yeah.
I know that you've got a lot of work to do here, so it's they just have the buzzword then. But yeah, there's been, more and more sort of agile facades being put on top of command control type
Sure.
companies, and or command comply is a better term actually. Command comply companies, and it doesn't work. Obviously, it's useless, isn't it?
Hmm.
Um, and the role of Scrum Master now is just sort of some like junior manager policeman in most organizations. Someone to rat out the developers when they're not working hard enough and keep metrics on everybody. Yeah, it's
That's
very
right.
sad. I mean, the potential for that role is as an organizational change agent is really what I've always seen it as. And
Yeah.
but people don't want that. They say they do, but when it comes to it, they don't really. So the Scrum Masters are just kind of like little team members, who don't really do much, and companies start thinking, "Why are we paying this guy?" And I would say, "Yeah, why are you paying them? They're not getting any value there." But
Right.
and then, so people start saying, "Well, Scrum Master is a useless job," and the way it's playing out, I have to agree, it is.
Yeah, I think it just depends on whether, how people were brought up, but it over time, the quality of, I don't know, the diffusion of Scrum in general has become somewhat diluted, maybe, or something. But
Yeah. I mean,
um,
when a lot of XP teams, I think you were probably an XP team before you moved into mobbing, right? I'm imagining.
actually, yeah. So when we started, we were doing the beginnings of XP, but when we started mobbing, it was actually before the team was doing any unit testing. It quickly led to unit testing, but mobbing actually was first for the team that we were on. But um, the organization had a tendency to release maybe a year and a half or longer for releases. And so in doing Kanban and kind of like we got a release out in a much shorter time, a couple of weeks, and um, and then and then in that there was a lot of desire to learn from other team members, and then that kind of jump started everything, which allowed for us to eventually be guided towards extreme programming or unit testing specifically. So there was a little bit. It was kind of all happening at the same time, a little bit, but I think our situation was very unique and centered around an emergency that was happening.
What you're describing it, Chris, it's what you're describing is a very emergent process, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
not an out of the box thing that you've gone to a 2-day class and learned about it and say we're just going to put that on top of what we're doing. It came from the bottom by the sound of it. I remember at a talk that Woody Ziel was given, he talked a lot about, well, he talked not a lot, but he talked about the importance of the retrospective.
yeah,
Um, in the work that you guys did, because it
yeah,
was constant learning, wasn't it? Whether you call it a retrospective or a reflection moment or a learning moment or something, but it was this idea of continuously improving and looking for
right.
what can we do.
So I would say that we implemented lean practices first, and so Kanban, Kaizen, all of those. So those were in place, and that's where the retrospectives in there, the continuous learning, continuous improvement.
Mm.
Out of that, I think emerged mobbing for us, and then later, as part of Kaizen activity, we weren't calling it as such, but it was part of it. I think one of our software developers had done a Lean Six Sigma training recently as well, so there was some emergence of the vocabulary happening on the team. But by the time we started learning unit testing, we had been mobbing a little bit already. And then it became like a growth activity for the team, and now we have, 30 plus people do all, doing all of those things and more. So,
When you say 30 plus people, I'm taking it you don't mean a mob of 30 people.
right. Yeah. We have many mobs at this point.
Anyway,
Yeah. That grew out of
yeah.
it.
The choice of word is interesting to me, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about really is like the language that we choose, the language that we use.
Hmm.
I mean, if you look up mob in the
Yeah.
dictionary, what it
Yeah,
says.
yeah, yeah,
Large and disorderly crowd of people,
Yeah.
especially bent on riotous or destructive action.
Yeah. It's also the term for a herd of kangaroo. So also a
A mob
mob of
kangaroo.
kangaroo. Yeah.
Well, the smart mobs came about, didn't they, in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
There was a book written about that, I think, and it was, about people being having a common purpose and
Hmm.
having to communicate is in the early days of social media, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
then there
Woody
was
recently has been moving towards Amy Edmondson's teaming and software teaming as an extension of teaming, which is I think part of her book. So I think the vocabulary is shifting. You know,
yeah,
back then we chose mob out of maybe we were going through names like pair programming plus plus and all those other, but we weren't talking about it at conferences. We were just kind of naming what we were doing because we had a visitor say, you should name this. Um,
yeah.
and so, you know, maybe mob at the time wasn't the best choice, but it was a good choice for us because we were just talking about like we're all getting together and
Yeah.
going through the
No, it turned
problem
out
and
to be a
talking
really
about it.
good choice, I think, didn't
Yeah.
it? Who would have known? I'm very glad you didn't pick pair programming plus plus. What a
Yeah.
waste. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we started talking about it later, right?
Yeah, and I guess maybe before we dive into mob, which I'm happy to do, Tobias, do you mind talking a little bit about your thoughts on the use of language in IT in general? So maybe we'll go general and then to specific. That might set the stage a little bit here. So yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about it, but I've noticed that over the years of working in various different companies and consulting a lot more, the language people use tends to drive the way of thinking and behavior. So companies that talk about firefighting constantly have fires, because it's almost part of their DNA. Is that big, and because it gives an individual a sense of purpose and an importance. They like it's like hero culture. Right, we've got another fire. We've got to call on Johnny. He's the firefighter for this organization, and Johnny comes in, and a lot of firefighting is basically cause what they're the arsonists, actually. I think the firefighters, the arsonists, right? They wrote the code in the first place that's breaking on everybody, and they're the
Sure.
only ones that know the code. They're the only ones that understand it. So we have terms like firefighting. And then we have terms like war rooms, which I find fascinating. People say we need to form a war room. We've got this really important problem. We're going to have a war room. Why would you want a war room? Why wouldn't you want like a collaboration space or something more hippie?
Yeah.
Bit less military, a bit more hippie. Because I think that it puts us in the mindset of these things, like we're firemen and we're soldiers. And a soldier obviously is a competitive role, isn't it? It's not, I mean, a collaborative with the teams they're working with, but there's a war somewhere. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have soldiers and you wouldn't have war rooms. So it's interesting, and I don't think we give enough thought to the terminology that we use. Some of these words just sort of come about. They're all metaphors, of course, aren't they? And one of the big metaphors that I really don't like or struggle with is engineering, software engineering. It isn't. It's just not that.
Right.
It's a craft. It's artisan work is what it is. It's not engineering. And I think that we pick a metaphor, and then the metaphor drives the way we think. And so we try to put in processes that are engineering processes and work really well when you're putting up a skyscraper or building a bridge or something. You've got to have a blueprint, you've got to have an upfront design. It doesn't work at all with software, does it? We know that. Try and get an upfront plan with software. I mean, people were writing about this in the 1970s. Tom Gilb with Evo. If you guys have probably come across that, right? So he basically said right from the get-go, you cannot design software products, they have to evolve. Now, he's a guy ahead of his time. It took another 20 years for the whole Agile movement to catch up with that. I remember I wrote to him once actually around that time because I had read some stuff by him. I said, how come you weren't at the Agile Manifesto meeting? And he wrote back, nobody invited me.
How funny.
But he was doing the stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
So then,
one quick thought I had was it's interesting because I've been watching uh first I watched all the clean coder videos and now I'm watching all the continuous delivery videos. Like I like to pick a project and watch all videos in category or person X. And it's been interesting watching Dave Farley's continuous delivery videos. Or now, you're gonna love this. They rebranded the channel to Modern Software Engineering. Or, um, and I think the case I've heard him make, and I'm not an expert on him, but was that now that we have Dora metrics and the Accelerate book, it can be a true engineering discipline because there's numbers to compare experiment A versus experiment B or something like that. Um, and so I think it is interesting. I haven't really investigated deeply. I'm more skeptical, and I guess I might find myself in the artisan category, just because I found Fowler's article on all metrics can be gamed or measure the
Yeah,
wrong thing, and I've yet to see even I've even seen the Dora metrics gamed, right? And things, and so
yeah.
I'm a little hesitant to. I'm okay with the metaphor, like I'm not disgusted by it, but I'm a little skeptical of it as well, as far as it meaning that we can measure everything with the same precision as in physics or something like that. Uh,
There's too many humans involved in software development. Hard to pin it down, isn't it?
yep.
Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
know. I think that people say, well, it doesn't matter what it's called. It's, call it software engineering, call it software craftsmanship. Does it really matter? And I think, yeah, actually it does.
Mm.
Because I think it changes our behavior, changes our way of thinking about things. One of the books that influenced me, and you mentioned it earlier, a lot when I first started learning about, well, more about, I don't know, when it was about 2002, 2003, Artful Making by Lee Devin and Rob Austin. And that book it's called, the subtitle of it is great, actually. It's What Managers Need to Know About How Artists Work. So it's a book written for management, but it was basically all of the same ideas that were coming out of the agile world at the same time, the early 2000s, and but they just came at it from a different place. Lee Devin was a theatre director and professor of drama at Swarthmore University, and Rob Austin was one of his ex-students who went on to teach at Harvard, teach business studies at Harvard. And so he got back in touch with Lee and said, "Well, that stuff you were teaching me, when on the drama course, that might apply in the business world." So they got together and they wrote this wonderful book called Artful Making, which is centered around performance, putting on a play, and using this idea of ensemble, which is it's kind of a pretentious sounding word, isn't it? Ensemble, um, but you can call it ensemble programming, is sort of mod programming if you want to be all sort of highfalutin. But it's the same idea essentially. It's like it's people, self-organized groups of people figuring out how to do stuff. So in theatre, the director sets direction, if you like, and but there's a lot of figuring it out as you go along, especially when you've got directors like people like Mike Leigh. I don't know if you've seen any Mike Leigh films. He doesn't have scripts. The script emerges from the actors. He says, let's think about a particular scene. It's almost like improv. So you're this kind of guy, and you're a woman who's lost her shopping bag, and then you start improvising, and then a script grows out of that, and then it's written down, and it's that's ensemble work. That's mobbing. That's emergence, and so they use some of those ideas, and to talk about how you might apply this in the business world. So it's not about software. That book. It's about managing a business essentially. And they talk about control through release, which I love that expression.
Hmm.
It's not like you don't have control, and that's the big fear, isn't it? Obviously, often when in the early days of people kind of are looking into agile, they go, well, it takes away my control as a manager. I have, no one will listen to me. I have no control. But you do. It's just a different kind of control, and they capture that so beautifully in that. And the other word they use a lot is play. Um, just the idea of enjoying the work, essentially making it playful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. One
So
follow-up.
they're
Oh,
different metaphors, Austin, aren't they? That's the thing.
mhm.
They never mention sort of engineering. They don't talk about business engineering.
Mhm.
Uh, they think about the business as a theater, as a troupe of actors or something, and it changes the way that we think about the work. So that's why I think that the language matters.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. And I think one fault that I have on that is um, how I think, at least in my experience, kind of drawing from the sports world and then bringing it back to the business world, is I think there's use of metaphor, kind of like the way XP talked about it, like a metaphor for the system that you use in all your decision making and talk about the system. And then there's also use of a metaphor where it's like a lighthearted mascot. So, for example, like in sports, I looked it up earlier, and in the UK and USA, there are tons of teams that have the name pirates or outlaws or things that are illegal activity, right? Um, but they don't use that uh, mindset in how they play the game. Like, okay, well, we're the pirate team, so we're gonna have to steal stuff from the other team to win the game today. You know what I mean? Like it's a lighthearted metaphor that you know they're not promoting illegal activity. They're just like toughness or adventure or even there's
Yeah,
kid shows around the world that use pirates as like the main character. But the
yeah,
show isn't promoting illegal activity and stealing and demolishing a town for conquest and getting gold.
mm,
It's teaching something else. And so I think
mm,
you're quite right. Like if, let's say Chris and I were ensembling or mobbing today, and I tried to use like the Boston or Chicago mobs techniques of extortion as like my model for how we're gonna, I'm gonna interact with Chris today. So like what blackmail can I get on Chris today to have him do the refactor I want him to do? You know what I mean? Like it's like a
yeah,
light-hearted metaphor
mm,
that's kind of playful and fun, and it has pros and cons. I won't doubt that, but it's not something we use in the modeling. Where I think you're right when people use it, like if firefighting is your metaphor you use to discuss the work all day long, then yeah, you're
mm.
probably going to think about it in those terms and have those consequences.
Well, if you've got firefighters, you need fires, don't you? So
Yes. Yeah.
otherwise, that person doesn't have a job. They become
Yes.
useless.
Yeah.
There's an incentive to keep things broken.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, and I think you're right. If it's used that way, it's certainly going to have that problem. But I think where it does have an impact is, uh, and I don't think people actually use it with this level of nuance, but I've definitely seen different styles of teaming, mobbing, ensembling, however you want it, where one style is more unruly, not illegal in extortion, but it's a lot more improv and a lot less. Let's say coordination, synchronized coordination, right? A lot more happening in parallel, maybe a little rowdy in a fun sense, not like the mean sense. And then there are definitely, pairs or ensembles that it's highly orchestrated. Like everything happens through a very slow going conversation, spoken out loud, and there's always one thing happening in the mob versus like maybe each person's trying stuff on the computer and throwing the results into the main, mob computer or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I could see it having an impact in that way. And I've heard people in the community say, I like mob more because it matches with my experience of it being more unorderly and chaotic in a good way. And other people saying, no, I like ensemble more because it is very orderly and precise, and so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the term mobbing only because it is a little it's a bit anarchic, isn't it? It's got that edge to it. I like it for that. And like you say, the way that people mob is going to be different, and it isn't a fixed way of working. It's not like in order to be a mob, you must have this structure in place, and you must have there's a whole kind of framework around mobbing. It's just like people were going to do it differently. They're
Mhm.
working together on solving a problem, essentially. There's a term that a colleague of mine used to use a lot, actually, Dan Rawsthorne. He talked about swarming in context of Scrum. So the idea of a Scrum team is they only people say, just sort of jumping about here. People say there is Scrum. The problem with Scrum is it doesn't have any whip limits, right? So people can, and that's completely not true. It has a whip limit of one. It's an innate whip limit. Like you only are supposed to work on one thing at a time when you're doing Scrum. You might have 10 items on your backlog for the sprint, but you work on one at a time. And in order to do that, you swarm. You've got a team of 5 or 6 people. They all figure out how to work on this one thing to get it done. So it's possibly like mobbing. I don't know. But he was using that term back in 2005, 6, something like that. And I picked it up from him. And I've always liked it. It's like swarm around it. And if you can't swarm around it, figure out how to. People say, well, I don't know what I've done my testing. I've got nothing left to do. Figure out, talk to people, pair with people. But if you create the conditions where people actually must work on only one thing and one thing only, and they can't work on anything else until it's done, then they're either going to be completely bored and leave the team, or they're going to figure out how to be useful. It's black and white in the end. You can't
Yeah.
just kind of hard at it. You're either going to do it or you're not. And I
Mhm.
have found that when the situations when I've been able to kind of really impose that as a limit, just see what happens. Ask people, just try it and see what happens. They end up liking it. It takes some work, but they do.
Yeah, I think you have to think about how you're going to coordinate, and often people don't want to do that, and so they'll say, "Oh, well, we'll work on different parts of the system, so we don't have to run into each other, or find different files or whatever." And so that coordination still has a cost, but like the way I see swarming versus mobbing, so you can mob while swarming, but swarming also is like you go work on the database and take a look at that while I look at this. Like maybe you have a production outage or it's like a firefighting thing. You all get into the war room and swarm. Um, and so, that certainly, I think that's traditionally what swarming is used for in the
I
context
think,
of,
yeah.
but I think that some people have been turning that into mobbing. Like I have heard of teams that swarm that basically mob whenever they run into an issue. And I'm like, well, if mobbing is so effective when you run into an issue, why not do it all the time? That sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I've run into each scenario. But so I think that mobbing might be considered a subset of swarming, where swarming could be different ideas, including um, we all get together and talk about the same problem from different perspectives on different computers, versus mobbing, like everybody working on the same computer to solve the same
Right.
problem. And they're different modes, I think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? And people struggled with pair programming. You're going to get half the productivity was the assumption.
Right.
So trying to teach people mob programming when they can't even do pair programming, it's like that's a leap too far for many. And yet, I'm imagining that in the experience of you guys doing it for so many years, you probably found fantastic productivity out of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
of course, that's the other thing, is it's not just the productivity, it's the higher quality.
Yep.
And
Productivity, quality, knowledge sharing, it's
knowledge sharing, yeah, but
yeah,
also getting the thing that you're making to be the thing that's actually useful and wanted.
right.
Not something that people think, yeah, I don't really need that. It's just, so the context you were working in, you worked very closely with the customer, didn't you? Because your customer was
Right.
internal.
Yeah. Well, in the early days, it was very much like the team had a tendency to allow for multiple product owners. So one of the earliest things we did was say, hey, we would like it so that, well, there's only one decision maker for the next most important thing. And so they're like, well, we have, stakeholders in marketing and sales and finance. It's like, okay, that's fine, but like, who's the one person that they all talk to prioritize each other's priorities before talking to the software team? That helped with a lot of like thrashing issues that the team was dealing with early on, and funneled like the end like say so about what goes into the product next. So we had access to that person essentially daily.
Oh,
Uh,
right.
and so typically what we see, and as we've grown, I would say that the availability of the product owner is directly related to the productivity of the software team. So we would, you know, our our worst sort of Dora metrics, right? If you go back and look at Dora metrics, but our worst Dora metrics were related directly to how often the product owner was available. So we would have a product owner that was only available monthly. We had one that was available weekly. We had one that was available daily, and then we had one embedded in the team. And so we had four different mobs going at the same time. And this was a totally unintentional experiment, but I had hard data afterwards. Um, and we were able to show the business that uh, the, even with switching software engineers in and out of roles, the product could not move forward as effectively if the product owner was not around to answer crucial decisions around the product and the customer base. So that was something that happened much later, but one, I think, big part of our success was funneling everything through that person.
As you're talking about that, I'm realizing again that that's another one of the big problems with Scrum these days is that there's this product owner role in Scrum,
Right.
and it's someone who has to make the decisions, just as you're describing. They have to make decisions in real time, so they have to have decision-making autonomy and power.
Right.
And for the most part, the people that fill that role in are like business analysts or something. They don't know that much, and they certainly don't have any positional power to make decisions about budgets and release dates and stuff like that. So the whole thing just becomes this insipid sort of mess.
Yeah. I have
And
a
it's
story about that actually.
tell
There
me
was
the
a product
story.
owner that was kind of dedicated to our team, and we found out much too late that this person was just delegated to some, a responsibility delegated to this person, and they didn't have the authority to make the decisions, but they were making the decisions, assuming that that would be accepted. And so we put out a full product in 3 months, and then the real person who made these decisions was like, "This is totally useless. We can't use this at all." And then they ended up throwing it away, even though we were able to release frequently in a production-like environment to create a minimum viable product of what this other person's vision was. And so from that point forward, we always included multiple levels, in the reporting chain as well as other people, and put out videos across the company to create, farming for dissent, like creating as much disagreement as possible throughout the organization about the product, so that anybody with the authority, the power to challenge the product owner would do so early. And that helped a lot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, what's your experiences in the application of artful making? Tobias, what's some shining examples or examples
Well,
that aren't so
I
shining?
think I just kind of incorporated the way of thinking into pretty much all of the work that I do.
Sure.
I have taught directly from the book, actually, using the framework of principles that they've got in there, which it's not in my head, so I'd have to go and have a quick look up on that. But it's the principles of collaboration, ensemble, and play are obviously really important. And I remember doing a session at a conference one time. I think it was in Toronto, and it was the purpose of the session was to recycle the conference t-shirts into fashion clothing. Right. So I literally bought sewing machines. I bought
I love it.
four sewing machines on the plane from San Francisco to Toronto, and set this room up. And we had like 20 people making clothes for half a day in there, using the principles of artful making and a kind of approximate Scrum framework of sprints, of like iterations. And it was quite fascinating. And Lee Devin, the guy who wrote the book, actually, he was there, just kind of like amusedly looking on. And occasionally, I would kind of check in with him to say, "Oh, you're kind of following the principles here." But it was a lovely moment, actually, to be able to sort of put that into practice. And we had some really nice output from that. I wrote about it. I wrote up the session basically with photographs. So I'll send that to you if you're interested. But that's the only time I've really applied artful making as artful making. Otherwise, it's just like incorporated it into what I do. The same as I do with many books that I read. I don't read that many business books anymore. I did in the early days, But now I read a lot of theology and philosophy now, and but I find a huge amount of learning in that, and stories. I'm very into storytelling as a way of helping people understand situations and systems better and behaviors. So that's been a lot of fun over the last few years, and teaching from scripture or from 1001 Arabian Nights or something like that. And
Nice. Well, this
but,
we're probably running out of time for me to jump into it more, but you and I might have a lot of synergy there. That's my one of my primary reading streams is classics, philosophy, theology, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and there's a lot of interdisciplinary uh, collaboration there that is quite useful in the business world and tech world. So
definitely,
yeah,
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, there's also, a lot of when we're talking about people talk about business agility a lot and how to use agile in the to run a business, which is a whole other kind of branch away from extreme programming and mobbing, certainly. But and why not? Obviously our businesses need improving, but there are already so many patterns in existence of how to run businesses well. Quaker businesses from the 1700s were using principles such as caring for your workers, and housing your workers even, and listening to the ideas from the shop floor in order to improve the products. Apparently, Quality Street, chocolate company in England, all of the flavors, they do a whole box of different flavors, and all the flavors came out of ideas from the workers themselves. So we have these lovely practices of existing, and cooperatives. The Rochdale principles from the I don't know, 30s, 40s maybe, about how to run a collective and how to run a cooperative, and where everyone in the organization has an equal shareholder in the business. And so we've got these models that have been around for a long time about running good businesses, but we don't seem to draw on them. And sociocracy is another thing that's been around a long time. That's just getting a bit of a revival. Sociocracy. There's a sociocracy 3.0. Anytime anything's got a 3.0, it's kind of
Controversial first draft and then slowly moving into the more modern.
So yeah, so there's a lot of good ideas around in terms of using the same principles from the Agile Manifesto in different contexts. It's tough though, isn't it? Because the manifesto was written for software developers for software developers, and so it's got the word software in there quite a few times. And if you really want to apply it to business, it's quite. I talked to someone the other day about. And I said I never show people the manifesto because it's too focused on software. And I thought, yeah, well, that's what it was for. That's why it was written, because
Right.
it's intent. But you don't have to go back to a software manifesto to run a business effectively when there's so many great models out there. Artful making is one of them. So go there.
Nice, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I like the Cynefin model and kind of Amy Edmondson's work on attempting to pick the right metaphor for trying to draw all these topics together a little bit here for the work, because I think you're right that the reason why command and control or something like that is the prevalent way of working together in business, it seems, is because there's all these assumptions that go into the work, right? Like we know the future, we know what's going to happen, the uncertainty's low. Chris has all the knowledge in his head. He just needs 50 people to work for him and do exactly what he says. And, he'll order the hamburgers to be made correctly, and we just got to execute on what he tells us to do, and then we'll get it done, right? And so right? Like where Amy Edmondson talks about, well, how much uncertainty do you have? How much interdependence do you have on other people? Um, and if both those values are very high, maybe that genius with 1,000 servants model isn't going to work very good, kind of thing. And so, in some organizations, I usually just kind of get utter silence and then they ignore me. But I'm at least trying to raise the question of like your model of just like a factory here maybe isn't what's really going on with this type of work. I don't know. What do you do to try to kind of shake the, I don't know, maybe the epistemology or assumptions that the business has to pick a different metaphor?
What do I do? I just challenge it when they're using those when they're using
Okay.
that language.
Mm.
It's you've got to be careful though, because people get very caught up in their own way of seeing the world, and I don't want to undermine people through that. But
Yeah.
um, it's kind of showing curiosity. Like if someone says we're going to form a war room. I said, is that a term that you use in this organization? And can you tell me what you mean when you say a war room? Because we might have different understandings of that. And then they start to explain it. And so I say, so you mean a place where people can collaborate? They go, yeah. I go, so maybe with like whiteboards or what around the walls and lots of pens. And they go, yeah, like that. I go, okay. So I said, there's no actual war then, right? Well, no. So it's sort of edging them towards maybe let's call this a collaboration room or a solutions room or something like that. Just
Yeah,
no,
war,
it's
I think,
not bad.
at the very least implies that you don't want to be in that room because if you're in that room, you're at war.
Well,
And,
exactly.
right? Yeah, because you can be collaborative against your enemy in war, right? But you also don't want to be in war generally. And
Right.
so even if the metaphor is taken in a lighthearted way,
Mm.
I think there is, even in the lighthearted scenario, the underlying connotation of calling it a war room versus a collaboration room is inviting. War room is like we must have done something wrong to be in here because now we're at war, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's reminds me of that Stephen Covey quadrant when
Mm.
things are either urgent or important, or they're only urgent and
Yes.
not important, and so on. The war room is when things are urgent. But the collaboration is when things are not yet urgent, and maybe not that important, but they could be. And so it's got this leisurely feel to it, like we're going to explore and learn in this space rather than we're
Mm.
going to panic and make fast decisions. So that's more war room thinking, isn't it?
Mm.
So it does matter. And I don't think we're even necessarily consciously thinking that way, but it drives that way of thinking um, unconsciously. So it's worth considering these words that we use when we talk about the metaphors that we use, I reckon.
Nice, nice. Well, we are coming up on time. So this has been a really fun conversation, kind of weaving all through three of our topics on use of language, kind of agile semantic diffusion, mobbing metaphors or other metaphors, and the application of artful making. And it's been quite wonderful, kind of jumping between all three or four
Yeah.
topics. And but before we close, Tobias, is there anything you'd like to share at close?
Well, it was delightful actually to meet you guys and know that you've been working with Woody Ziel for so many years and back in the early days of no estimates and mobbing and the birth of mobbing and everything. It's and that I had some conversations with him, and we possibly met at that San Diego conference back in 2008, maybe somewhere around that time. I don't know. But yeah, it was I didn't realize how closely connected to the whole birth of this movement you were, and I think that's exciting. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, mobbing, extreme programming, the early agile movements when it was really about software development. And that's the exciting part for me. It still is, even though I don't code that much or hardly at all these days. That's still where my passion lies about making this kind of work. And the organizations around the IT organizations around this and the corporate businesses that surround it, if they can't think in the same ways that the developers are beginning to think, it's never gonna happen.
Mhm.
It's always going to be a jungle. That's what the Scrum Master job is supposed to be. I think they're like the path beater. They go ahead of the teams and they clear the way so the teams
Yeah, yeah,
can
yeah.
be fantastic and be great and don't have to deal with all the corporate BS. But we don't have a Scrum Master. We have a Scrum Master who's running after the team, keeping metrics, there's no one to clear the path. We need path beaters.
Nice. Yeah. That has a lot of synergy with that metaphor of path beater has a lot of synergy with a lot of coaching roles, and so I love it. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tobias, for sharing with us today. It was definitely inspiring and thought-provoking, and I think left gave me a lot of things I'm taking away in my learning, and to our audience, we'd love to hear what you think on these topics. And please like and subscribe. Please reach out to us asynchronously, either through YouTube comments, LinkedIn comments, or X, or wherever you can find us. And have a good one, and we'll see you next time. See you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. It was great. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
See you
Thank you.
again.
See you.